Hi everyone, Dex here from A2K. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, BIM 360 Design plus Revit Tips and Tricks. We will have Consulting Technical Lead Chad Smith presenting for us. So we'll just go through about A2K ourselves. We're all about fostering innovation through consulting and training. A2K Technologies plays a vital role in helping the infrastructure, building, mining, construction, architecture and manufacturing industries reach their full potential by delivering complete technology solutions and support services such as education, consulting and IT managed services. We're working with visionaries to shape the future of design and in turn enable them through innovation to minimize risks, improve productivities and achieve excellence. A2K Technologies is considered the business partner of choice and trusted advisor by vendors and clients. We partner with major software and hardware vendors to meet the client's technology needs. We strive to exceed client expectations by understanding the challenges and delivering solutions through experience and innovation. We work with clients and companies of many sizes nationally and abroad. Over to you, Chad.
Thanks a lot, Dexter. Good morning or evening to everybody, wherever you may be. My name's Chad Smith. I'm a consulting technical lead at A2K Technologies. I've been working in the general industry for over 20 years now, working for some fairly large design and construct companies over the years. So I certainly understand a number of the challenges that people face as they're working on their day-to-day projects, and particularly in the space of collaborating with other people. And certainly in most recent times, as we go through this period of COVID, that moving from that office space and out into the remote space, and particularly when working with other consultants, has been challenging, and we have certainly seen a fairly large adoption of BIM 360 design. And that is certainly also reflected through the number of registrants that we had for this particular session. So we're assuming that we've probably got a fairly broad spectrum of people online at the moment. Those that may have only just started working with BIM 360 and maybe just using the bare minimum to get those people working remotely, all the way up to those larger organizations and projects whereby you are working with other consultants and the extended team. You may be a project or an account administrator of your BIM 360 account. So we're hoping that this session provides a little bit of extra information at varying levels for all people that are working on their projects. Now, this being a fairly narrow topic as well, BIM 360 design is something that is part of the broader BIM 360 portfolio. I guess things like tips and tricks are few and far between. So we're going to go through what we can see on the screen here at the moment, just as a bit of an agenda as to some additional things that hopefully might just give you that extra competitive edge on your project. We're going to go through these tips and tricks in a fairly logical and linear order. We're going to start off just at that initial setup process, talking about the folder structure and some of the permissions that we can apply to those folders to get certain people accessing certain information. We'll have a look at the publishing process, how we can link files together, in particular having a look at the extended workflow into the Civil 3D space, because Civil 3D certainly has some integration into BIM 360 these days, and since we're working live and collaboratively, we'll just have a quick look at how we can work together there. And then we'll move into that publishing and packaging space whereby your information is going to start being distributed in those formal manners for other reasons and other workflows. And then finishing off the session by having a look at a little bit more publishing information and the Revit version upgrading process, which I'm sure most end users in particular probably haven't seen, but maybe those project admins have actually seen where that space is. Now, because we do have a fairly large audience today, we're going to attempt a Q&A towards the end, just all depending on how many questions we may come up against. If you do have any questions, feel free to use the Zoom Q&A panel, either during, so if we're going through a topic and maybe I haven't covered something that's relevant to that topic, just chuck it into the Q&A panel, and particularly towards the end of the session, we'll give you another option to add in any questions, the things that I may not have covered. Okay. By the way, this isn't necessarily a training session per se. We are working on the basis that most people have had some experience in the BIM 360 design space. So let's jump into this. This is going to be a live demonstration of some of these tips and tricks. All right. Just give me a moment. I'll just switch over to... Let's start with this one right here. I'm just going to minimize something off on my second screen so that I can see what I'm doing. Okay, so to begin with, we're going to talk about just the structure of this project file space over here, because when we're talking about BIM 360 design, we're talking about having those live files in a structured location so that everybody can access and work on them, but also in conjunction with the likes of ISO 19650, the international standards for common data environments and workflows. Now, to an extent, BIM 360 design does follow those basic principles. And for those that have not actually seen the standards before, this is A2K's copy of the document, where we can see there is a topic in here on the common data environment specifically. And if we just follow through this and come over to the second page, we can more closely see that at a very high level, there is a very simple 4-step process for the transition of project data from a work in progress perspective, and that's where the BIM 360 design falls into this, moving it through a shared workflow, then out to a published state here whereby we might be publishing documents such as drawings, and then archiving it if that information is no longer required. So BIM 360 design specifically falls into this top 2 section up here, and by extension of that through BIM 360 docs, it ties in with the published component of it. Now, when we go into, let me find the, sorry, I'm just going to move a Zoom panel out of the way on my screen so that I can actually get to the Chrome tab that I'm after. So inside the project admin space here, when we do go ahead and add a team in, let me just select it. All right, we give the team a name. We can see down the bottom here that there is a place where these default, a default location where these teams are being generated. And by default, that falls underneath the project files folder. So if we actually go back over into the docs space, so under project files, by default, if you don't make any changes, your teams will end up as the next folder underneath this top level. But also within the BIM 360 design workflow is the fact that information is shared. And BIM 360 automatically generates and manages a corresponding shared folder. So we don't have a work in progress, but we have a shared. So the tip here is if you actually create a new subfolder, we call it work in progress. That means when we go through the team's creation process, you can then browse to that project files work in progress folder, thereby giving us that additional folder here, which now matches up with the out of the box shared folder. And then we add in those teams under the work in progress, so that way we maintain a more clean environment, thereby allowing all of these other folders up the top here to work separately from the BIM 360 design process. You'll also notice in this case here, I also have a published folder and an archive folder, but I mentioned a moment ago the process of publishing drawings out, in this case, which would be under the plans section. So the plans would be considered our published space. So you can see how BIM 360 design actually ties in to that ISO 19650 4-step workflow. Now, whilst we're still looking at these folders, we can also set up permissions so that other people can access the BIM 360 design information other than just those Revit users. So now that we're talking about this work in progress information where our Revit files are going to be stored, We know that through the creation of BIM 360 design teams, such as an architecture team, this would be their dedicated location where they're working live on their files. And by default, it also means that other non-Revit users cannot actually access that live information. Now, if we're talking about an internal workflow within your own organization, that could be the likes of maybe a design manager who may need to review that design information as it's being worked on. So in this case here, if we were to go into the permissions for the architecture folder, maybe we might like to add in a particular company or maybe a particular role. So if we go through here and if we were to have a look for someone like maybe a designer, if we had custom roles in there and so forth, well, then we can add those people or roles in and add them in maybe as a view only. So that way they can review and also contribute feedback through markups and issues. Likewise, over on the sharing folder here where consultants are sharing their information, we can do much the same. So in this case here, maybe under the architecture folder, if maybe let's say an engineering manager just needed to be able to review that information, and again, they're not a Revit user, well then we can add their permissions in here as well. But when we're talking about permissions from a BIM 360 design workflow, and we come back over into this project admin space for our teams, we're not necessarily talking about allowing just a specific team's own internal users accessing that team's information. All right. So here underneath this architecture team, where we would obviously expect to see all of the architecture users, roles and companies being able to work, view and work on that information, maybe we might also want the likes of the engineering team to be able to view those same live Revit models. And you might be asking, well, why do we want to do that? And the reason here is that maybe those engineering team members don't want to link in shared information, but instead maybe they want to link in the live Revit model itself. Okay, sort of living on the edge a little bit, living with that very live information. So in this case here under the architecture team, if I was to have a look for maybe an engineering role, such as, let's see, the engineer role or maybe the engineering company, you know, either one of these will probably do the right job. And if we gave that role a view only permission, it means they can now link to that information. It means that the information from the architecture team doesn't necessarily have to be packaged and shared. It means that those teams can now start linking that live information. And this obviously comes down to how people want to work. Now, while we're still looking within the project admin space here for design collaboration, we know that when the Revit users are working live and they need to release their information as a package either to other consultants or publishing that information back over into the document management space so that non-Revit users can access it, so thereby increasing the version number of these files. All right, by default, this is a manual process. But fortunately, when we select a team inside the project admin, we can set up a scheduling, a publishing schedule. So here we can do this, for example, on a weekly basis, and we can pick out which day, maybe which time. So let's just say, for example, on Sunday, let's say late at night, we can set up a publishing process, and also obviously ticking this on. That means that every Monday morning when people come into the office, the architectural team, the non-Revit users, will now have newly published information inside of Docs so that they can now start reviewing that information. Maybe this is done at the end of the week as well, just to capture that week's worth of work. This additionally also publishes the information into the design collaboration user interface in readiness for creating a package. Now, unfortunately, at this stage, we can't do this on a daily basis. We dare say that it's probably a limitation on the Autodesk service so that they're not having to constantly process the information. So just take note, this is at minimum on a weekly basis. Now, by extension of that publishing process, and when we jump over now to the design collaboration interface, whereby when a live Revit models are published so that they are now ready to be packaged and shared, we know that not everything is always perfect and issues can arise. You know, it might be that there's something inside your Revit file that that BIM 360 is not expecting, could have been generated by a third-party add-in, for example, and therefore the publishing process hasn't actually completed. You may not have noticed, but over in the right-hand side over here, there is actually a project status page, which just describes the health of the files underneath your team. So let me go ahead and open this up, and we can see here for the services team specifically, when the information is being published and consumed and so forth. And if any of these are actually failing under their publishing state, you can use the details link over on the right-hand side here to get a little bit more information. Now, it isn't necessarily in a human readable format, but when raising a support ticket to either A2K or maybe directly to Autodesk, capturing this published information will actually give us and Autodesk that extra level of information to track down what might be the problem as part of that publishing process. So we know inside of Revit, we can do things like audit. We've got the journals and so forth. Think of this as the BIM 360 equivalent so that we can track down why something may not have published. Okay. Now, as part of the design collaboration process, we know that through the timeline up here that we have the ability to consume shared consultants files into our own workflow and create and use those as links in our live environment, and vice versa back to the consultants. But we also know that there is other file types that need to be used outside of Revit. They are most notably things like DWG files, it might possibly be an IFC file, and so forth. Now, for the most part, Revit will quite happily, let me just go to my Revit interface here, Revit will quite happily just use the link Revit option here and browse to BIM 360 where we can link in either yours or other consultants' Revit files. But when it comes to linking things like maybe a CAD file, we need to go through a different process. So this now comes to the Autodesk Desktop Connector, which hopefully you've got installed, but not everybody knows about it. Let me just open up a link in a web browser, which I probably should have had open in advance. But if you do a search for the Autodesk Desktop Connector, you'll be able to download the application. This is a Windows system tray application that runs, and it now means that when we come over to our File Explorer, we have a new BIM 360 drive over here. Okay, this is not too different to maybe a Dropbox, a Office 365 OneDrive, or a Google Drive sync that you can add to your local desktop. So through the BIM 360 syncing here, all right, we find the account that we're working in. Let's say A2K Technologies, and then we can jump into these project spaces and then access the files. So noting here that we can actually browse through this information through our Windows Explorer, the same is true when we go back over into Revit. So here when we go Link CAD and open up the Link CAD dialog box, rather than going to BIM 360 directly, we're actually now going through that local drive. And this will give you the ability to link in any non-Revit files or whatever other additional file formats that Revit currently supports. Now, whilst we're also still talking about the topic of file linking, there is actually a reasonably good integration between Revit and Autodesk's Civil 3D product. The other products like Civil 3D, Plant 3D, InfraWorks, and so forth have slowly been gaining their own native integration into BIM 360. So that means that within the same project space, Revit and other design tools can now be used within their live environment. So I would suggest that if you are working in a collaborative BIM 360 project, maybe just reaching out to maybe the other engineers that are working on there and seeing whether they are actually using Civil 3D, because you can actually gain some benefits inside of Revit through BIM 360 design. So what I have over in AutoCAD, or sorry, I should say Civil 3D, I've got a Civil 3D file. This is actually a model, so let me orbit around here, okay, where we can see all of our topo surface and graded information and so forth. And from Civil 3D, either you, if you're multidiscipline, or the other consultant, they're able to publish their surfaces through to BIM 360. I'll just pull this in from the other screen. As part of this publishing process, they can choose what it is that they would like to publish. Maybe it is just all of the final levels. Maybe it's just the existing the existing topography that's found within this file, or a combination of all of the above. So this information is published out, and if I jump over to BIM 360 document management, whereby down underneath my work in progress folder, you can see here that I have that shared Civil 3D DWG file. I additionally have an equivalent Revit Civil file. So let me now jump back over into Revit and have a look how we bring this in. So in this case, let me just remove that existing link that I have there. All right. In this case, we're going to link a topography item. Now, this just typically takes a few seconds to open up, depending on the speed of our internet that we're running on. Hopefully it won't take too long to load this in. But instead of linking a DWG file in the usual way using the link CAD, or dare I say the import CAD option, this is linking the Civil 3D file directly. So here we go into the project space. You can see here I have done this in the past. Selecting that Civil 3D publish, we'll link this in. Most other rules about linking another file like a DWG file in this case still apply, but what we end up with specifically being a Civil 3D file, and because of this integration through BIM 360, is actually a topo surface now that is more akin to a native Revit topo surface. This is a topography item which has been resolved in its design, not one that we're now going to further make design changes. So quite quickly here, just some of the benefits of linking into our live Revit model from BIM 360 is that this is a topography item that we can firstly label. It also means that when we have a look at it, let's say in the 3D view, we can select subparts of that link. We can maybe put those onto different phases. So this might be existing, the platform might be new, and it also means that we can apply a material. So I'll just grab maybe a grass material and we'll apply it like so. What we can't do though is when we select it, you can see there we don't have our typical topography modification tools, but at the very least it does give us something nice and clean and a little bit easier to use with some of those customizations. Okay, so if you are working on a BIM 360 design Revit project that has a consulting engineer in that civil space, maybe just reach out to them to see if they're using Civil 3D and being able to integrate it like so. Okay, let's see. Let's go back over to BIM 360 design and let's have a look. Let's have a look down underneath my work in progress. Okay. Let's say, whoops. All right. So underneath my work in progress folder under the architecture team, you'll notice that I've got a new folder here for documents. And within that document folder, I've just got a couple of Office documents, as we can see here. A somewhat more recent improvement to the design collaboration process is the inclusion of other, let's say, non-design files. So if I'm acting on behalf of the architecture team, and I think I might have timed out. Let me just give this a full browser refresh. Okay, that's a bit better. Okay, so working on behalf of the architecture team here, we can see that I've got a somewhat unfinished package over on the timeline. I'm going to select it. I'm going to edit it. And you should be familiar with, as part of this process, adding things like your published sets from your Revit model, maybe even just the model itself. But a somewhat recent addition is the ability to add other documents. So these are supporting information that goes along with this package and is relevant to the design files. It has a specific scope to it as to what it is that we can add in. You'll notice when I go through the Add Documents button here, that it is specifically looking from my own architecture team, not the other teams, not other parts of the document management space, just my particular team. And it does support a number of file formats that Docs itself additionally supports. So in this case here, I've already added these documents in, but they may be relevant to this particular package and for other people to consume as well. Now, whilst we're still within this design collaboration space, let's have a slightly closer look at the timeline. So you're familiar with the fact that files get published, they get shared and consumed and so forth across this timeline. And depending on the frequency in which you're publishing and sharing and consuming files and how many, depending on the number of teams that you've got, this timeline can get quite cluttered and could cause a little bit of confusion. Now, a little lesser known button is this filtering button that's over on the left-hand side. Let's expand this out. So there's two things that we can filter on and off within the timeline. The first one is just getting rid of my team's published statuses on the timeline. We can see here when I go and toggle this off, let's have a look at it from the services perspective instead. Yeah, there we go. So we can see over on the far right-hand side that we've got a couple of published files. And from the perspective of my team, I might not want to see those just so that I can focus on the information which has been packaged instead. And additionally, what you may not have known is that if we expand out these other consultants or these other teams, we can see the files from those teams that we have consumed in the past. Now, again, with a rather large project, the list of links that we have here, or the files that we've consumed, could get quite long. So in this case here, under the filtering, we can additionally toggle those off just so that we can remove those dots, those markers from the timeline itself. All right. So now we're going through this design process where packaging and sharing and consuming files and so forth. Let's now have another talk about another extended workflow. And this now falls into a different BIM 360 model called model coordination. Now, this has been an area whereby A2K has certainly heard a number of requests in the space, and that is when those customers who are utilizing the model coordination tool, the question was, well, why can't I use the models that we're working with or are sharing within that process? Because as you would know, if you are a user of model coordination, all of the model coordination had formerly had to be done underneath the plans section, which didn't quite make a lot of sense. And you can see here, even under the A2K account, we've got a folder that had, let's say, published models that we used as part of that coordination process. Well, just a couple of weeks ago, they've now opened up the project files so that we can coordinate our active BIM 360 design Revit models, AutoCAD files, and even IFCs. So let me just jump back over inside the project admin again, and this time underneath the model coordination admin settings. Give this a moment just to load up. All right, so here we can see that inside our A2K account, we've got a number of previous coordination spaces, of which I said one of them was underneath that original plans location. But more recently, we've added in the ability to do it specifically, and this is my personal preference, from the shared folder. It stands to reason that as design consultants are working on their BIM 360 design models, and as they package and share that information to the other design consultants, it's probably at that point in time when the packages are shared, therefore they've been issued, that those models could probably be suitable as part of the model coordination process. You'll also notice, just while we're looking here, is that I've also created one today for the work in progress for the services. So maybe the services team want to be able to do some model coordination on their own work in progress information that may include some other consultants' information which isn't necessarily running through BIM 360 design. So this means when we come over to the model coordination module, for those that have access to it, we can see in the top right-hand corner different model coordination spaces, of which I'm currently on the shared space. And that means we can then go to the clashes tab over here to get an idea as to how many coordination issues are being raised. And likewise, also talking about that work in progress services space, if I change it to that space for the services team specifically, okay, we can see their own MEP files. And in this case here, there's also an IFC file from the structures team. So just considering for a moment that maybe the structures team are not actively participating as a Revit user in BIM 360 design, but the services team may have received an IFC file. If they put that underneath their work in progress folder, that can then be included in the model coordination process. It just means that the BIM 360 design working space is actually now closely tied, finally, into that model coordination process. And I know a lot of you who are using model coordination have been waiting for this day to come. Let's take a step back and let's have a look inside the document management space. Now, just moving away briefly from this work in progress space and the shared space, and now considering when drawings are being published for consumption, either by Revit users or other design managers and other users and so forth. Now, I know a lot of you are probably still publishing out to a PDF file and maybe uploading those, and that's fine. That's still a very legitimate workflow. But what you may not know is that if you have configured your Revit file with publish sets, and just while that's loading, if I just jump back over inside of Revit briefly, I mean underneath the Collaborate tab and then Publish Settings, where we can create a set of sheets. If we go ahead and upload that corresponding Revit file that has a list of published sheets, then BIM 360 is going to extract out those sheets as drawing documents underneath this plans section. So we can see here I've got a range of drawings that have been extracted specifically from a Revit file, but you'll also notice that there is an additional document towards the bottom, which is actually a 3D view. Now, this might seem a little bit weird as to why we might have a 3D view as part of our 2D information, but it certainly makes much more sense when we're starting to view the 2D sheets. So let's just give this drawing a moment to load. Now, as part of a design review process, it's not necessarily just about viewing and marking up drawings. You need some context. You need to understand what's being shown in plan view and its context relevant to maybe the 3D model so that you can understand things like heights and so forth. So down towards the bottom, using the split view mode, we can now open up that 3D view that I had set up inside of Revit from that live BIM 360 space. And when it was published over into plans, we can see now that we've got the 3D model. And this is contextually relevant because when we start selecting things like this wall in the 3D view, it'll identify where it is in the plan view. And likewise, if I was to select an object in the plan view, it'll contextually identify it over inside the model. This 3D view here, let me just show all objects again, is just another type of view that sits alongside the other drawings as we can see here. But if set up correctly all the way back in our Revit space through BIM 360 design, this now becomes active through that 2D review process. And additionally, when we're talking about the publishing of sheet information from our Revit models, just a brief note here that we want to be consistent. Don't go ahead and unnecessarily change the names of sheets inside your Revit model, regardless of whether it's being extracted out as a document from the Revit file or whether it's published out to a PDF file. Making name changes, like sheet names, is actually quite detrimental to the management of those drawings back inside of BIM 360. Because these drawings are versioned every time they're updated, if you've changed within inside of Revit the name of this drawing from what it currently is, then you will end up with an additional document. It won't version this. So just a brief note that if you are making changes to sheet names in Revit, that it will have an effect on that publishing process over inside of Docs. And we're going to end this tips and tricks session on what happens as new versions of Revit are released. Okay, so we're at version 2021 at the moment. This project space here is still version 2020. Now, the traditional workflow and probably thought that most of you have is, well, let's go ahead and download these files or maybe open them from BIM 360 Design and then just, open them in the newer version and then publish those back up. Now, unfortunately, in this case, there is a disconnect between Revit and BIM 360 in that Revit will only see those project spaces that are of the same version as the Revit that you're using. So instead, BIM 360 will allow you to do a cloud upgrade. Let me jump back over into the project admin for one last look at this. This time it's over on the document management space. This has to be done by a project admin, so I certainly know that most end users don't necessarily know about this. So over in the document management project admin, under Revit Cloud Model Upgrade, this would check the project, see what version you're on. It gives you a test upgrade that you can do to make sure that the models are going to be upgraded successfully. And if BIM 360 deems that those models can be upgraded successfully, you can then finalize that process. Now, at the moment, version 2021 as an upgrade path is not yet supported. It will no doubt come sometime in the near future. That doesn't mean you can't have a 2021 project. You can if you start it as a new project, but past projects at this stage can't yet be upgraded to version 2021. So hence why our 2020 version project here is currently noted as the latest. But this is by and far the easiest method to do a project upgrade. I'm going to hand this back over to Dexter, who's going to close out the session for us. But otherwise, from me, I thank you for your attendance.
Thank you, Chad. And thanks again for joining us in today's webinar, everyone. As Chad mentioned, we'll follow up with the questions left unanswered. And if you have any more questions, you can always contact us via email at info@edukatechnologies.com.au. Bye for now.